In the heart of the Pacific Northwest, where towering pines stretch towards a sky perpetually shrouded in clouds, there lies a forest that few dare to traverse. The Nisqually River snakes through this rugged terrain, its cold, dark waters carving a path through the dense thicket. For generations, stories have circulated about the strange happenings within these woods, whispered tales of hunters who never returned, of shadows that seemed to follow you between the trees. But it wasn't until the winter of 1985 that these tales would solidify into a chilling legend, a story that would haunt the state of Washington for decades to come. On a frigid December morning, Michael Reamer, a man as tough as the wilderness he called home, loaded his red pickup truck with supplies for a family outing. Michael was a roofer by trade, but his true passion was trapping, an old-world skill he had perfected over years of navigating the Nisqually woods. It was a place he knew like the back of his hand, where every animal trail, every bend in the river was etched into his memory. That day, he was accompanied by his girlfriend, Diana Robertson, and their 2-year-old daughter, Crystal. They were on a mission to find a Christmas tree, a small gesture of hope to mend their fractured family. Michael and Diana's relationship was far from perfect. Those close to them knew the volatile nature of their bond, a love marked by intense arguments and brief reconciliations. In October of that year, Diana had even filed a restraining order against Michael after he kicked in her apartment door during one of his infamous rages. But love has a way of blinding us to the warning signs, and by December, the couple had patched things up. Deciding to give their relationship another chance for the sake of their daughter. They hoped that a trip into the forest, surrounded by the serene quiet of nature, might be just what they needed to rekindle their bond. They set off that morning, the truck rumbling down the winding road that led them deeper into the forest. The sun was weak, a pale orb barely breaking through the thick blanket of clouds. As they drove, the trees grew denser, their branches knitting together overhead to form a canopy that blocked out what little light there was. It was beautiful, in a stark, desolate way, the kind of beauty that makes you feel small, like a mere speck in the vastness of the wilderness. Hours later, as the light began to fade, a disturbing sight emerged in the parking lot of a Kmart in Spanaway, Washington. A tiny figure, no bigger than a toddler, wandered aimlessly between parked cars, her small, pale face streaked with tears. It was Crystal, Michael and Diana's daughter, but she was alone. Shoppers paused, staring at the little girl as she stumbled, barefoot and shivering in the cold. Store employees quickly approached, wrapping her in a blanket and trying to comfort her. When they asked where her parents were, she didn't respond. She only kept repeating one phrase, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mommy's in the trees." The police were called, and the mystery deepened. How had this little girl ended up 20 miles away from where her family was last seen? And what did she mean by "Mommy's in the trees"? The words were haunting, evoking an image of something terrible, hidden away in the dense forest. The search for Michael and Diana began immediately. Search parties combed through the forest, calling out their names into the endless expanse of trees, their voices swallowed by the cold, silent air. They found Michael's red pickup truck abandoned on a secluded logging road, buried under a fresh layer of snow. Inside, the scene was unsettling. Blood was smeared across the passenger seat, dried into dark, rust-coloured stains. On the dashboard lay a manila envelope with a simple message scrawled in pencil. "I love you, Diana." The handwriting was crude but unmistakably familiar. It looked like Michael's. As the search party ventured further, they stumbled upon a grim discovery. Just beyond the road, partially covered by snow, lay the body of Diana Robertson. Her face was turned towards the sky, eyes open as if staring at something beyond the veil of reality. She had been stabbed 17 times, a frenzied, intimate attack that spoke of rage and desperation. Around her neck was a tube sock, tied tightly in a knot, as if placed there deliberately, a grotesque signature left by her killer. But there was no sign of Michael. The authorities were quick to suspect him. Given his history of domestic violence and the circumstances surrounding Diana's death, it seemed like a clear case of a lover's quarrel turned deadly. They theorized that Michael had snapped, murdered Diana in a fit of rage, then abandoned Crystal at the Kmart before fleeing into the forest, either to escape justice or to take his own life. It was a convenient theory, one that tied up the loose ends neatly. But as the days passed, the case grew colder and doubts began to seep in. Only a few months earlier, in August of 1985, another couple had met a gruesome fate in the same area. Stephen Harkins and Ruth Cooper were found dead during a weekend camping trip. Stephen had been shot while still inside his sleeping bag, an execution-style killing that suggested a cold-blooded predator. Ruth's body was discovered weeks later, 1.5 miles from the campsite. Her neck, too, was bound with a white tube sock tied in a similar knot. The connection was impossible to ignore. Was it merely a coincidence, or was there something far more sinister at play? The local media dubbed the unknown perpetrator the Tube Sock Killer, a shadowy figure who seemed to stalk the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, preying on couples who wandered too far off the beaten path. The fear was palpable, spreading like wildfire through the small communities that bordered the woods. People began locking their doors at night, avoiding the isolated trails and campsites they once frequented. The forest, once a place of solace and peace, had become a territory of terror. For years, the case lay dormant. Crystal, the only surviving witness, was raised by her grandmother, but she never spoke of what happened that day in the forest. Perhaps she remembered more than she let on, or perhaps the trauma had sealed those memories away, deep in her subconscious. Her cryptic words, "Mommy's in the trees," echoed in the minds of investigators and family members, a riddle that time refused to solve. In 2011, more than 2 decades after the murders, a hiker made a startling discovery. A fragment of a human skull, bleached white by the elements, was found near the area where Diana's body had been located. Forensic testing confirmed it belonged to Michael Reamer. The rest of his remains were never found, but the skull was enough to raise new questions. If Michael had died around the same time as Diana, then he couldn't have been her killer. It was a revelation that turned the investigation on its head. The police were forced to consider the possibility that the true culprit was still out there, a phantom who had eluded justice for nearly 30 years. The legend of the Tube Sock Killer persists to this day. There are whispers of other unsolved cases, couples found dead under similar circumstances, their bodies left in remote areas, far from prying eyes. Each case bears the same chilling hallmark, the presence of a white tube sock, tied in a knot around the victim's neck. It's a detail too distinct to ignore, suggesting a pattern, a ritualistic act by a predator who still roams the wilderness, hidden in the shadows of the towering pines. As the years roll by, the forest remains silent, its secrets buried beneath the fallen leaves and the thick moss that carpets the ground. New families come to hike and camp, unaware of the dark history that lingers in the air. And somewhere deep in the heart of the woods, where the sunlight barely pierces through the canopy, the spirit of the Tube Sock Killer waits, patient, watchful, like the eyes that once followed a little girl across a Kmart parking lot. Some mysteries are never meant to be solved. They live on, whispered in the wind that rustles the leaves, in the shadows that dance at the edge of your vision. So if you ever find yourself in the depths of the Nisqually woods, remember this story and tread carefully. The forest has eyes, and some stories never truly end.